One of the real joys of working with the Methodist Foundation for Arkansas are the friendships and relationships that we have with people all over the state. Right now, we can't visit face to face, but we're waiting for the time when that can happen again. We miss seeing you. Be safe.
We sure are missing our friends. Y'all be well. We hope to see you soon.
We miss you.
We miss you and we hope all is well.
I miss seeing you at the foundation office. And one day we'll be back together soon. But until then, I hope you are staying safe and well.
Hi everyone, we miss you and we hope you're staying healthy.
We miss you.
Hi everybody, we miss you during this time. We hope you're doing well and we can't wait to see you soon.
Greetings on behalf of the staff at the Methodist Foundation for Arkansas. We just wanted to take some time to remind our foundation friends that we are thinking about you and we're missing you during this time. We pray that you are staying safe and connected, and we just look forward to the time when we can all come back together. Stay well.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see all of you. We're going to get started here in just a moment. I would like to begin our day, though, with an opening prayer. So if you would, let us pray together. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this new day, for the promise that it brings to us, for the blessings that we will receive, for the friendship and the learning that we share here this morning. We also give you thanks for the challenges that are before us, and we pray that your guidance and your wisdom and your spirit would lead us as we face each of those challenges, that what we do and what we say would bring credit and honor to you and your kingdom. Guide and lead us now, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Our morning session is going to be provided to us by Cliff Christopher. Cliff is not with us in person, but he did come out last week and recorded 2 sessions for us. In 30 minutes each, we'll see session 1. We'll handle any questions that you have. Wayne and I will try to answer or help the discussion with following each one of those presentations. Then after the second session that he recorded for us, we'll have an extended time of discussion. We'll answer any questions, follow any particular interest that you have at that time. And then following that, we'll give a final bit of instructions for our next session. So that's kind of our routine or our order for the morning. We do want to thank Jacob Turner and Amy Azell from the Conference Communications Center who are helping with the technology and providing all this for us. So before we get started, any burning issues that somebody needs to talk about or share, anything you need to say before we get started? Well, I see no one raising their hand, so we're going to cue up the video, and this is Cliff Christopher. Many of you may know Cliff. He's a retired United Methodist elder here in Arkansas, lives in Cabot, and is president and CEO of Horizons Incorporated, which is a fundraising aspect or entity of the United Methodist Church. So, Jacob, if you'll start the video, we'll begin session 1.
Well, hello. My name's Cliff Christopher, and I'm the founder and the president of Horizon Stewardship Company, and it's my pleasure as a member of this Arkansas Annual Conference to have an opportunity to come and speak with you today in regards to the changing nature of stewardship. Not just changing because we're in the midst of a horrific pandemic with churches and programs shut down, but changing by the very nature of culture changing. Stewardship needed to begin shifting nearly 30 years ago. And frankly, we in the church have not done it. We have continued to do things pretty much the way it was done in the 50s and the 60s. And many of us are finding that that is not working. So today we're going to talk about making changes and how we can be successful in Christian financial stewardship in our churches today. The little cartoon that you see on your screen, I have used now for, nearly 20 years since I found it. It so tells the story of what is happening in our churches. You see on the screen, this man wants to be baptized, and preacher says, when I baptize you, everything that goes under belongs to God. And you see in that last little slide what's going on. The guy is under, but he's holding his wallet up out of the water. He wants to give it all to God except for. And the simple reason is money is loved by him more than God is. He has more trust, more confidence, more faith in money and stuff than he does in God. Doesn't like saying it, doesn't want it to be known, but that's the bottom line truth. And most of you have members just like this throughout your churches. Oh, I'm a Christian and I love Jesus, absolutely, but the real Lord of my life is money and stuff. That was the biggest problem that the Pharisees had in Jesus' day, and it's the biggest problem that our religious people have as well. Their religion is still far more the golden calf than it is the Lord on a cross. That's where their real trust and confidence is. And we are the only army to combat that. No one else is fighting this war except for the church. That's our job. Now, your next slide shows how money is winning for those of you, and I'm sure there aren't many who would doubt it. You can see that 32% of what Americans have goes into housing. 16% goes into transportation, 12% into food, and 12% is placed in insurance and pensions. And then you have health care and entertainment. And then there's this big category of other that 7% fits into, and that's where charity comes into play. The vast majority of where our money goes is spent on ourselves. The average American spends $1,383 just for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The two big holidays upcoming, Thanksgiving in November, Christmas in December, the average American, now that means in my household where there's two of us, my wife and I, the average is that $2,700 will be spent to eat those turkeys and to give out those presents. And that's the average. $565 a year is spent by the average American to purchase alcohol. $327 by the average American is spent on gambling. And I was frankly surprised this one was as low as it was, but $167 is spent on jewelry. But this last little note that I stuck in there for you is stunning. That in the United States of America, $3,075 is being spent every second on internet pornography. $3,000 every second in this country. These are the places where our money, that which God has given us, as somebody referred to it, Jesus's wallet, this is where we're spending Jesus's wallet. And who is it that is saying it's sinful? It's wrong. There's a better way. If it's not coming from the church, then it's not coming from anybody. There really is a war on. And my question is, are we even in the fight? Have we in the church even determined that we want to be in this fight? And if we have, how can we win? Well, the first step in winning this war for the hearts and minds of persons that they will choose Jesus Christ and His church for their gifts versus so many of these other things that I had down here, was that we have to understand how the donor thinks. Why is it that people choose to give in the first place? None of us have the ability to make anybody give us anything. None of us. Our mission, our ministries are determined on people choosing to give to us. So why do they do that? Surveys are taken every year testing why is it that Americans choose to make gifts where they choose to make them. And consistently, the following come out: 1, 2, 3. The number one reason why it is that Americans choose to give is their belief in the mission. That they believe in what you're doing and they want it to continue. There are very few people in our society who would say to us, I like the world exactly as it is. This is exactly what I want. Everything is perfect. We all see areas we want improved. What we want to make sure we do is that we give to those places who are actually doing what it is we highly value to get done. If it is incredibly important to us to save the whales, we are going to give to those nonprofit institutions that we see who are successful at saving whales. If it is important to us that Jesus Christ become Lord of all and that His kingdom come, we are going to give where we most believe people are successful at making that happen. It's the belief in the mission. Every nonprofit that I know and have worked with, and there have been countless numbers over my numerous years of serving and consulting in the nonprofit arena, every single one of them is consistently sharing with its people and its donors how it's doing the mission. And even now, as I continue to work with some secular nonprofits, the biggest thing they're doing is communicating, and many of them have ramped up communication in this pandemic, sharing how we are doing our mission, because they know that's what drives the gifts that come in. My question to you is, how are you communicating to your donors, your people, that you're doing the mission? Have you even defined your mission to a point that you can share with people, we are doing it and doing it well? Even in the midst of a pandemic, here's how we are changing lives for Jesus Christ, and doing it consistently and overwhelmingly, that they continue to still want to support you. I like to look at websites, and I'll look at a nonprofit website, and right there on the front, the opening page of their website is how they're doing their mission. Generally, it involves a testimony of somebody connected with that mission. Pictures of lives being changed. I click on websites of churches, and what do I see? Picture of a church building. Sending the message to anybody who clicked on it, our mission is to build church buildings. Now you would say, oh, that's not true. That is the message you just communicated. How are you sharing your testimonies, communicating with persons? We are in the business of changing lives, and we are successful at it. Now, the second chief reason why it is that Americans say they choose to give is their regard for staff. People want to have confidence in those persons who are going to take their gift and apply it towards the mission. They know if they just dropped a bundle of money on a doorstep, that's not likely to do anything. But if they can place that money into the hands of someone whom they trust significantly and highly value and believe in, then they have a sense that that money will be well used. Every nonprofit knows that its chief executive officer or president or whatever they call the person is the one who needs to be the number one fundraiser, because they are the person who can most communicate, here is what we will definitely do with any dollars you give to us and how it will make a difference. That relationship between that person and the donor is huge. But in the church, we have made the incredible mistake of saying that we want to have as little a relationship as possible between donors and pastors, to the point that 74% of all pastors in this country don't even know who their key donors are. They are left to guess. 74%. Do you think 74% of college presidents don't know who the donors are? 74% of those who are heading up food banks don't know who the donors are? 74% of the chief executive officers of Boy Scouts don't know? No. There's not a single one that would run like that. But the church does, making it almost impossible for the pastor to make decisions around who is it that is most going to be able to help us fund the mission and the ministry that we want to do to succeed here. And it cripples our ability to be successful. The regard for staff is the second highest reason why it is people said they choose to give there. And then fiscal responsibility is the third. People want to back winners. They do not want to be backing those organizations that seem to be failing. No nonprofit communicates out to its donors that the ship is sinking. Therefore, you'd better give. There's only one that does that, and it's the church. And we send those letters out 2 or 3 times a year. Oh my gosh. Here it is, those tough summer months. We're likely to go under if we don't get some help. We hope you'll all chip in and get us through these tough times. And what happens is those letters go out every single summer and then other times in the year, because falsely people believe that the more we cry wolf, the more our peoples want to give to us. And it's absolutely 180 degrees wrong. I even have churches that want to print what the deficit is in the worship bulletin. We expected 100,000. We've gotten 80,000. We're 20,000 behind. I think one church once even printed it in red ink. I mean, hooray for that. I mean, that's exactly what I want to do. Boy, I can't wait to get my money and throw it down your rat hole. How are we motivating our people to give to help us do the mission? We're basically saying we can't even do the mission of keeping our budget in order. We're a mess. Now, some of you I know are saying, oh yeah, but we're not really that bad off. But it just helps us. The more they think we're behind, the more they'll give. You're wrong. The exact opposite is true. People back winners. They don't want to back a loser. You need to be talking about how you're doing the mission, not how far you are behind in balancing the budget. Peter Drucker left us with a great quote. He didn't intend it to be solely for the church, but it certainly applies to us. He did it in a book he wrote about nonprofit management. And here's what he said. A business has discharged its task when the customer buys the product, pays for it, and is satisfied with it. Government has discharged its functions when its policies are effective. Yeah, that hadn't worked out too well lately. But the nonprofit institution, that's us, neither supplies goods or services or controls. Our product is not a pair of shoes. It's not an effective regulation. Our product, people, is a changed human being. That's what we sell. The nonprofit institutions are human change agents. Their product is a cured patient, a child that learns, a young man or woman grown into a self-respecting adult, a changed human life altogether. That's what we sell. When we stick that cross on the front lawn, we stick it on top of our building, we are advertising in the name of Jesus Christ, we change lives. And when we do that, people will shop in our store. But when we advertise it and do not produce it, when they show up and they do not see changed lives, they will shop someplace else. And they will spend that money in those areas that I laid out for you earlier. They'll decide, well, maybe pornography really will give me more of what I need. Maybe alcohol will get me where I want to be. Maybe if I buy more jewelry, get more stuff, get a bigger car, get a larger house, and they fall into that trap because we have not confronted it with the truth of who the Lord truly is. Changing lives is the key, and communicating it is the key to stewardship in every church in America. Now notice too, in this next slide, as you're giving thought to how you need to communicate and talk with your people, there are 1,327,000 tax-exempt organizations in America. Nearly 1.5 million nonprofits in America who can provide to their donors the exact same thing that you can in the way of tax exemptions, charitable contribution, etc. And they are all competing for that same dollar, and they're competing against the people in your pew. They are saying to them, oh, we're doing a wonderful job of feeding people. Oh, we're doing a great job of making people well. Oh, we are changing the way our youth are growing up. And they're making their cases with testimonies, information that constantly goes out about how they're doing their mission. And what we send out too often is, we're 3% behind in the budget, and we sure could use a little extra to get us through. You are competing in an environment right now that's tenacious. And in the midst of this pandemic, it's even more tenacious. These nonprofits are struggling too. They're not able to gather their donors in the same way. And they are looking for ways constantly to be communicating how they're doing, what they're doing, so that they can stay afloat. And many of us are just trying to get by. Now, the next slide on there shows you about the donations to nonprofit groups, and you can see that it's been on a steady and consistent rise, going up and up and up into where nearly $450 billion was given in America to nonprofits. $450 billion. That's a lot. And it's been going up every year. But the scary part of that is in the next slide, which shows you what's been happening with gifts to religion, which you will note has been steadily declining. Americans are giving more, but as a percent of those gifts, their gifts to religion have become less and less. It used to be that religion received over 60% of all charitable gifts in America. 60%, not all that long ago. And today, it's 29%. 29%. First time in history it has dropped below 30, and it's now been there for the last 2 years. Money's still coming. America's just saying, we don't believe in you anymore. We don't think you churches are worth giving to. And that if the world is going to change and be better, it's going to happen elsewhere. So you need to be prepared to answer that question. Why should they give to you? Why you? In the last 30 years, gifts to religion have fallen 51% in market share. 51%. Now, this next slide that you have on your screens shows giving by denomination and what the income is for persons who belong to those particular denominations. This was done by Indiana University, and it's been now 11 years since this was done. I would love to see an update on this. There may be one. I haven't seen it, so I still have to use this old slide and show that to you. But you can see quickly by looking at it that the best givers in America are the Mormons. And that probably doesn't surprise you too much. Then you have the other Protestant groups. That's the non-denominational groups, the New Life, the fellowships, churches like that. Then you have the Pentecostals and the Assemblies of God. And then it starts to drop significantly. And down there in the middle, you have this cluster of what we would call the mainline church. Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and Methodists. And you can see, looking on the far right side of that slide, gifts to religion as a percent of their income amounted to between 1 and 1.1% of their income. Now, last I heard, a tithe was 10. The average Methodist is given 1. 1. It's very sad. I mean, we're just barely ahead of the people who said they have no religious affiliation. Even they gave 0.4. So what is it that caused the Mormons and Assemblies of God to give so much more than we do? Why is there such a gap? They're giving 4 and 5 times of their income what we Methodists are. And they live on our streets. They live, in houses that look like ours. They have jobs that look like ours. What's the deal? Now, you can't say, well, it's all theology, because the Mormons and Assemblies of God have got almost nothing in common when it comes to theology. So what is it they may have in common that causes their giving to be significantly better? And the one thing I have come upon in all of this is expectations. They have much higher expectations of persons than we do. These two churches actually expect people, and they share it with them before they join, expect them to be in worship, to serve outside of the church, and they expect them to give 10% of what they have at a minimum every year. And they tell people that, amongst other things, these are the expectations of what we believe a disciple of Jesus is. And when you look at those churches, you will see that they have more people in worship than they have on the roll. When I talk to their leadership, they will share with me the reason that is that a number of persons are coming who are not yet ready to make full commitment. So they're just told, you come to worship all you want. You come to our classes. You call upon us if you're sick or hurting or need us at all. But these are the expectations that we have before you become a member. Now, how many of you would say that you have more in worship than you have on the roll? How many of you would say that anyone who joins your church is well aware that the expectations are that they will be in worship, they will be in service, and that they will be tithing of their income? Now, yes, we Methodists can say, oh, well, everybody pledges, you know. Prayers, presents, gifts, service, witness. Yeah, everybody does that. But almost nobody understands it. And oftentimes it's given as like an afterthought when they come up to join. And certainly we don't talk to them about money before they join. We just see if they might get into a class after they have joined. What does that say? I mean, can you imagine? You know, a couple comes for premarital counseling. I said, now, we don't want to talk about it before you're married. Let's just go ahead and get married this week, and then we'll talk about the expectations of that later. So, Billy Bob, don't you worry about giving up your other girlfriends right now. Go ahead and get married, and we'll just have a chat about it as time goes on. How ridiculous is that? No. Before we meet them at the altar and say, you're now ready for marriage, we hope they understand what the expectations of full commitment to someone else is. Well, joining the church is marrying Jesus. It's a full commitment of self to Jesus as Lord. And yet, we act like it's no big deal. Therefore, we wonder, why don't we get a higher level of commitment down there? Why do people not want to jump up and serve? Why won't they get into mission? Why don't they give better? Because they joined for the potluck supper. They didn't really join to be highly committed. They just joined for the fun and fellowship, and we let them get away with that so we could just keep putting people on the roll. Jesus never said, go forth and make members. Go forth and make disciples. If you intend on turning around stewardship, you have got to develop a high expectation culture inside your church, or it'll never happen. High expectation churches in America are the ones actually today that are growing. It's the low expectation churches that are dying. Well, Lyle Schaller, to close out this little section, said to us several years ago in the last book he wrote before he died, the new face of American philanthropy is distinguished by an unprecedented level of competition for the charitable dollar. And for well over 90% of all Christian congregations, it means they'll not be able to compete. It's a new world. It's a competitive environment. There's a war on, in a way, for the soul of each and every one of us. Money and stuff, or Jesus is Lord. Will we engage or not?
Okay. We're going to take we're going to take as much time as you'd like to discuss the video. And we can do that in a couple of ways. If you have comments that you'd like to offer, or if you have questions based on what Cliff was saying. And then when we finish this discussion period, when you're finished with that, then we'll take a break. So anyone have a particular question or a comment that they'd like to start us off with?
I'll jump in. I feel like I feel like I hear this information often, especially if I'm reading or listening to anything from Cliff. And I appreciate the dissemination of information. And I always feel compelled. My mind's always running toward, man, I need to put these kinds of things in a stewardship sermon. But then when the message is done, I always feel like I need a shower to wash the negativity and hopelessness off. So I struggle with that because I feel beaten up and hopeless when I hear those messages, and I don't want a stewardship message that sounds like that. So that makes people feel that. So I don't know what to do with that information. And that's just raw and honest. Sorry.
That's a good observation. Anyone want to respond to that or comment to that?
I mean, I will. I think that for me personally, it's behind the scenes, back burner, second thought for stewardship about it, and it almost would seem to me that Cliff puts everything through the lens of that raising money, right, with the bottom line, which for me isn't my lens for everything. So, but when we see things through that lens, then we can take a better look at like our website and what we're saying, what our mission is on our website, and then connecting that to stewardship or connecting that to making disciples in a way that what everything that you're showing, everything that you're saying would all fit with that mission statement. And yes, that's in there, that's in my thought process, but it doesn't seem to be the first thing I think about, so I have to be super intentional, I feel like, about meeting that where he's pulling me to go. It's not just my natural go-to.
I can appreciate the jarring way that some of the information is received, but I think that it's attention getting, and so it's effective. Obviously this is the first session, but the other is that it's not just, in my opinion, the message is not just a shock factor message. I mean, and I don't know if anybody's really had much of a chance to look through the book that was sent to us, but I think Cliff, after being an attention getter, which he is, does take the time and effort after identifying a problem to offer some processes. And one of the things that I feel like I hear Cliff saying is about consistency and attention to the message of transformation being regular in the life of the church. I know that as he references, you send the letter at summertime and say we're behind, or you send the year-end letter. And I don't hear Cliff saying to the church and to the pastor and to the financial team to not send the quarterly letter, the year-end letter. What I'm hearing him saying is that that's not enough. What I'm hearing him saying is that on some levels that is not consistent enough. And so, I think that the information is maybe even old hat to some of us as pastors, having, heard before, but I think that really there is a lot of opportunity maybe with laity, with finance chairs and finance teams in a church to have the initial conversation that I think is jarring to people to receive. At least that's been my experience in churches where I've served, and that trying to focus on things that he talks about, like sharing a story each week before that you take an offering. Pre-pandemic, that was something that I tried to do for a long time every week, to have a little pastoral moment and often invite people up or tell about something that happened that week. Now, I can't say that I got that from Cliff. I actually learned that from a person named Mackie Yoakum a long time ago. I was serving in a church that had a couple $1 million of debt and a pretty small budget, and had a few meetings with Cliff, and at the time was struggling, and Cliff had told me as much. You don't send letters to people and tell them, we're failing here and you need to give more. No one's going to respond to that. But in a positive way, one of those items I remember, I believe, was that Mackie had encouraged me at the time each week to be telling about what the church did that week. As simple as that is, to say, hey, thanks Mabel that brought the socks. Thanks for this. Thanks for that. Thank people regularly in worship. Another thing I learned from Mackie that is also in Cliff's book, I think it's chapter 7, when he talks about a chapter called A Battle Plan, where he gives you some solutions. Another thing he talks a lot about is thanking people and writing notes and letters. And I believe Mackie, if I remember 10 years ago or 15 or whenever it was, got me in the habit of writing 10 notes a week, which was pretty easy to begin with. And then we tried to get to writing 3 or 4 or 5 a day. And in my little world, in my little universe, communicating with people more consistently than quarterly and once a year has been helpful. communicating to people in worship in a public way about ways they've given of their time and talent and treasure has affected the bottom line, believe it or not, in churches where I've served. And writing to people through a week, taking time to send them a handwritten note and thank them for the things that they've done. This week, that'll be thanking people for donating Halloween candy. Anyway, I've gone on and on, but I do appreciate what she said. It is a jarring thing to hear. And I don't think that Cliff would say that that's the speech you give at your donor dinner is the one he gave us. I think that's the speech you give to your finance committee or to your leadership team to get people's attention. And then you try to get this book in their hand and have a conversation about the positive ways that you can influence your church and tell your story of changed lives. Because the last word really is what he said as he compared us and told how good the world is. At St. Jude's good at telling people they change lives, and we need to be better at it.
Thank you, Justin and Claire. The information, I think that, well, I think one of the things that your responsibilities as a leader in stewardship in your local church is to be a diagnostician. You diagnose the issue. And the information that he presented may very well be true in the congregation you serve, may not be true. But one of the things you have to do is you have to figure out how that applies to the folks you're dealing with. And I don't know that it's necessary you share that information with people, but at least you have that in the back of your mind as to the group of folks that you're working with in your congregation. He made 3 key points, which I think are very critical. That it is, the first role in stewardship is education, in the sense of communicating to those who give to the church why they should give, and then the effect that it has on the mission, which I think I would interpret as laying out clearly what the vision of the congregation is. What are you attempting to do? And then showing how that changes people's lives and communicate that clearly. And then to develop a high expectation environment. That, yeah, we are expected to attend, we're expected to give, we're expected to serve, we're expected to pray, we're expected to be, involved in mission. And through the years, one of the most heated conversations I would continually get in with parishioners is they would say, "You're expecting a lot." And my response is, "Well, no, your argument is not with me. Your argument's with Jesus." That's clear biblically and experientially. So I'm just kind of laying it out for you here. And so if you have an argument with that, that's an argument you need to have with Jesus in your time of prayer. It's a spiritual issue. And then you communicate that clearly. And if your responsibility, I think, and this, I think, kind of brings back what Cliff was trying to say, is to articulate the vision and invite people to be a part of it, and then let them know how their participation in it changes lives. That's what I heard him say. Others?
Yeah, Mackie, I'd love to hear some more. I think one of the challenges, he talks about competing with other nonprofits. Well, other nonprofits often have a more a tangible mission and vision, in the sense that they're feeding people, or they're providing for the homeless, or they're working on housing issues. I do think the church's mission and vision is a little more abstract in some sense, and it's hard to narrow. I mean, so a big part of our church is a feeding ministry. Well, that's only a little bit of people's giving. You know what I'm saying? I mean, half the giving's going to the staff salaries, right? And then another third of it's going to upkeep these buildings. So communicating, I need you to give X dollars to help us with our mission and vision. To me, that is harder than Cliff is making it sound. I don't have a great story every week about how someone's life was changed. Does that make sense? We're playing more of a long-term game, worship over many years, transformation, sanctification. I struggle with that part of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that the caution about the information he gets can get in the way of what you're attempting to do, because you're attempting to create a mature stewardship understanding in a person's life for a lifetime.
That's right. Yeah.
You're talking about a lifetime here.
That's right.
And then you, as pastor, I think you're talking about it in a corporate mindset of what the church is doing.
Right.
And it's just like, relating it to a family budget. A family has so much income every month. Well, you have to provide for your home. Well, a church has so much income every month. Well, it has to provide for its buildings. And one of the connections I think that you can make is, yeah, we're going to feed the hungry, but you got to have a place to store the food. So you got to have a kitchen. You got to have a way to move it around town. So you got to have a van. It's all interrelated. And the burden of explanation and connection is on you as you communicate that. And
to me, that's the big challenge, because I don't know how to say all that in like 3 minutes before the offering. Like, to me, that's a little more involved story than just as simple as Johnny came this week and he didn't have any clothes and we clothed him. Isn't that great? Please support the church. There's just a little more to that. So.
Well, here's the thing about it, I think, Dane, is that the more groundwork you lay, and it becomes a part of the mindset of the congregation, then those stories come easier and they come shorter, because people understand that they will develop an understanding that this happened today because of something we did 2 years ago. Right. So it is creating that environment or that culture, and it doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come quickly. It's something you have to work with and lay out over a period of time.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, Dee?
Yeah, one thing that I think is helpful, and I've tried to incorporate, as I've heard some of what Cliff has said before about some of these things, into with limited results or mixed results. But one other thing I think is really important is to bring back the small stories that the example Dane was talking about, to the overall vision. So if you have a vision statement, if you have a mission statement, and you can say, hey, we can't, and there was a person that was naked and we clothed him, and that connects to making disciples for Jesus, and however, whatever language you use, whatever mission, the more that you can incorporate those things together, even if you're not giving them the whole spiel, you're, like you said, Mackie, you're laying the groundwork. Yeah. So that, I think that's one way of connecting to what Danes was saying and what Justin was saying about taking opportunities in the worship service to tell stories. They may be short stories, but if you can connect them to the vision and to even using the same wording, even though that may sometimes get monotonous, but I think the more, you can't say your mission statement enough times. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Good point. Thanks, Dee. Others?
Wayne?
I'm sorry. Wayne.
I think another point that I heard him saying, and it's from my early days in the local church, was always a struggle for me. And that is our role in all of this. And Cliff, I think, made a good point of that. We went to seminary to be the chief theologian and maybe the chief educator. We also sometimes are the chief dishwasher and the room setter upper. We don't like those tasks. And it's really been later that I've realized that, his point is we are the chief fundraiser in the church. And, I struggled with knowing people what they gave. And if, according to his statistic, if we got 10 preachers in the room, 7 of them would argue why you should know, and 3 would sit there and argue why you should. I've become more in that camp of that you should. And I think his point about every nonprofit outside of the church is going to know how much their major donors are giving, and they're going to be moving donors up to the next level of giving, and that's how they're successful. So I know we don't like that part of our role, but I think it is a good point that we need to continue to struggle with.
Tagging on to what Wayne said, and I found this part hugely helpful too, and threatening in the beginning when I first experienced that. The shift from, I'll call it the polite, see no money, there is no evil. But having made the shift, I know that it's effective too. And in that section in the book that you gave us, that same chapter, he talks about as well that you don't just send a generic letter to everyone in your church. And again, I have to credit Mackie just because it's a fact that this kind of conversation, which was met with resistance in a church where I once served and in a few others along the way, that it does take more time, it takes more effort, it takes more planning, it takes more individual calling and conversation to do just that, that your correspondence in writing and your correspondence in person needs to be individualized, and that just doing the prayers, presents, gifts, service cards is not enough. I mean, I'm going to do those in January, as I do every year, have been doing in the fall, but moving to January in any case, it's harder to do and to take on, particularly if the culture of your church, in my experience, is, well, the pastor doesn't need to know that, or we don't show that information. But getting down to it and getting started with it in my little life has made a big difference in being able to, as he says in the book, to really thank people who give the most, to challenge some people who are giving at a very low level about stepping up, tailoring 3 or 4 or 5 kinds of letters, and to people whose giving is minuscule and highly inconsistent, to trying to challenge them to being more consistent. It's important. And the discipleship piece is, we want to challenge people. Really, we don't want to just have them join and that not matter. We want people to attend. We want people to pray. We want people to serve, but they're not going to do that just asleep at home in the bed. They have to be asked. And in my experience, as painful as it is to try to do, I'll just confess, I want to be liked like a golden retriever. I want somebody to pat me on the head and say, good boy. I just confess it, it's true. But I find, as hard as it is, and that yes, people will resist that or get mad or even that there is so much good about growing together with other people that takes place, and that the culture of your church can change for the better in doing this and in trying these steps. And it can begin just as simply as that, in my experience, with tailoring your stewardship time, your quarterly letters, your annual letter, in tailoring some of that, and in writing notes and so forth. And I would encourage us to try it,
All right, thank you, Justin. Herschel, I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just took away from what Cliff had said was just that we need to try to create a culture of expectation.
Yeah.
But that's so important in the church, because a lot of times when the church, we don't put expectations that other people put outside the church. Case in point, we've been dealing with a culture of being outside with the pandemic. And so we said that, and our folks have followed behind that. But, at the beginning, a lot of people came up and they asked me, is it going to be too hot outside to have service outside? And I said, well, I don't know. You ask your basketball or your baseball coach if it's going to be too hot to play baseball. And so the culture outside the church is they set these expectations that people do, and they don't ask the questions that they ask to the church, because the church has not put the expectation out there. So the things they ask us at the church, they don't ask the other entities that they're in, because those entities have set the expectation. And I think the challenge for us as people of faith is to let that high expectation, be a part of what we have, and that reflects back to what we're doing. So that's what I took away from what Cliff was saying, is we've got to create that culture. We've got to have high expectations. And if we don't have high expectations, then our folks are be just fine,
Yeah, thank you, Herschel. Others?
I'll jump in. Mackie, I guess my struggle, or I've served several churches now, small churches, even at times rural churches. And to a lot of your smaller churches, 50 and under in worship attendance, stewardship is kind of taboo. It's not, you know, it's a lot of them are on a lot of your people are on fixed income. So they even ask, you know, I've given the same amount for X amount of years. Why do we need to go through this? Are there, I mean, right now I'm serving a church where we have several people that if there's a need in the church, you know, parking lot needs repaved. He's a farmer. So he'll just, you know, he'll go pull some money, and next thing you know it, the parking lot's paved. So, I mean, I know we have different contexts. You have the small church, the medium-sized church, and then the larger church. But I just seem to struggle with, because it is my current context, stewardship in the very small church.
Yeah. And this is Danita. And I guess my thing is, how did it get to the point where talking about stewardship became so taboo? How did we get, I mean, stewardship within the church? And I don't know if it's the African-American tradition that, you know, I've been raised in, that it has always been understanding that we take care of the church. And when there's a need, like, you know, you said about the farmers, that, you know, that when there's a need that arises, the people of the church just take care of it. Mm-hmm. And so I guess the question is,
don't worry about it, Pastor.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So on one hand, it's like, okay, if there's a tangible situation and we've got someone in the church who has that skill set, it's done. And so we're supposed to understand that. But then when it's time to ask for individuals to give at a different level, what has made that a taboo area to discuss? And, you know, like my sister said earlier, you know, when she finishes with the stewardship thing, she feels like she needs to take a shower. And I'm like, but why? You know, who told us that was an area that we should be guilted into, that we should guilt individuals into talking about? If in fact, one thing I can say about working in realms where I work with all kinds of denominations, Methodists are the most married to their facilities than any other. Most other denominations are married more so to the pastor. The commitment is to the pastor. Whereas with us in the United Methodist denomination, you know, pastors change, but you're not going to sit on my pew. We're going to make sure that this is taken care of. And so I guess my question is, what makes it so difficult? What makes it so hard? Why are people so challenged when we ask those questions?
Anybody want to respond?
Because their wallets weren't under the water when they got baptized.
That's probably it. Well, let me go back and make a comment to both Danita and to Heath. It's been my experience that across all cultures and all contexts, small and large congregations, that Methodists have issues with trust about money and giving it. I've seen people who could write the check out of their own checking account for the budget of the church for the whole year, and they'll fight you over a nickel. And I've seen that even in small churches. So I don't think it's different. I think it is different context, but the same issue. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Danita asked a good question. We need an answer.
Mackie?
Claire had her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the onus is on us. If we don't start from the get-go, like our first Sunday in our appointment, if we don't start talking about it, even in like small ways, talking about where our wallet is, or, you know, just in tiny ways. But every year stewardship campaign comes around, and I say the same thing, Justin, that to my stewardship team, all these nonprofits are doing it better because they are pulling on our emotional heartstrings. When you see those commercials on TV, you want to give because they tell the stories. And so if we're not telling those stories in general at all, or, you know, then yeah, I think it's all about setting it up, and we have to be the ones to do that, which makes it really hard because I don't want to do it all the time. That doesn't sound like fun.
I want to say something, and I'm in a really small congregation. So you, particularly in my, this is contextual just to me, not because I grew up in a small church and this wasn't true. But it is true in every church is the control piece. One of our generational founders of our church, throughout her family, was taught not to tithe. Because then you were supporting the pastor and you might not like the pastor. I mean, and that is a really hard thing to unlearn. And so for years, I mean, there was a special fund here that was for a steeple, and it wasn't structured, they weren't structurally able to build it. But when this person wanted to tithe but not support the pastor, would put that memo in their check so that they could say they were tithing but not really tithing. So even what we went back to yesterday with all the different accounts, because that's not tithing. I mean, our vows say we support our church, not the people we like or the programs, and they want recognition. So I don't know, that's a real interesting thing just in my context, because I've never experienced that in a church before where people saw that as control. So it's somebody who is loud and very bossy in the church and has money, and people assume that's one of the biggest givers and doesn't give at all unless she's asked to give to a project, because then she gets recognition.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a really interesting generational way of being taught to control a church instead of support a church.
Okay, let me cut us off here, and let's take a break. And Jacob can hear me, so let's come back. Let's take a short break. Let's come back at 10:15. 10:15, and we'll start the second session and then have discussion after that. Okay, 10:15. And we're ready to begin the second video that Cliff has prepared for us. And we'll follow this the same way as we did before. We'll hear the videos about 30 minutes long. Then we'll have a time of discussion. So take notes. If you have questions, be prepared when we're finished to enter that discussion time. Okay, Jacob's going to cue it up for us, and we invite you to listen and watch.
In this segment, I want to talk with you about specific ways in which you can begin to improve stewardship within your local church. Somewhat understanding the foundational part of what I laid before you in the first hour. Here are now some more practical and specific things that each of you can do. My third book was entitled Rich Church, Poor Church, and maybe there's one or two of you that read it. In that book, I discussed the various characteristics that I have seen over my nearly 30 years of leading the Horizons organization, of churches that are what I call a rich church, that being a church that has significant money that it spends most all of its time talking about mission and ministry, versus a church that doesn't have significant funds and has to spend most of its time talking about money and funds. That church I call a poor church. So don't get confused with the language of rich church, poor church, and think I'm talking about, well, one church has a multi-million-dollar budget and one has just a five-figure budget. No, that's not true. One has a huge endowment and the other one does not. That's not true. We're talking about their ability to be in mission and ministry, and what are the characteristics of those churches that are able to expend their energy on mission and ministry versus the pursuit of money. You got to remember, we are not in the money business. We're in the Jesus business, the ministry business. So how do we need to act and what do we need to do that lead us that way? And there certainly are characteristics that I have seen, and we're going to discuss those. In the rich church, you will see that they discuss mission first. In the poor church, their discussion is around survival. You hear things in the poor church like, we have been here for 100 years. And our great-great-great-grandparents helped build this church. And if we don't get busy on it, it's not going to survive. We have occupied this corner for so long. But if we don't give better, we're going to have to abandon it. So everybody give that we can continue to prop up the old place and survive. Whereas in the rich church, it's always mission first. Mission first. You know, when I was in the Army, and I was for a little over 18 years, the Army ethos begins with, I will always put mission first. I will always put mission first. And for those of you who have been in military service, you know how true that is. The discussion is always around the mission. The mission is the focus. It's what we have to do. And we just don't let things get in the way of that. Fulfilling the mission is everything. In the Army, I oftentimes saw and heard them talking like this, making decisions like this, and I was always translating that back to church. Wouldn't that be great if that's the way our meetings were conducted? That mission was always first. And yet I look at our meetings, and how do most of our board meetings begin? With the treasurer's report. And what does the treasurer usually say? We are behind. And then the next person that speaks up that wants to talk about a new ministry for our children, the very first question that gets asked is, what will it cost? We just heard that we're short on money, and it generally dies on the vine. Where the first question should have been, how does it help us fulfill our mission? Now, all of this makes an assumption that the church even understands that it has a mission, and everyone in leadership certainly knows what that is. And then every single thing that's brought up in that leadership meeting gets back to mission. Everything. When Aunt Hazel jumps up and she says, I want to make a motion, we paint the ladies' room purple. Question doesn't get resolved by saying, well, Aunt Hazel, we don't like purple, we like pink. Or, gosh, we better go along with Aunt Hazel because she writes a big check every year. The question is, Aunt Hazel, thank you for that. How do you see the ladies' room being purple helping our mission? It all goes back to mission. Calling on the youth director. Youth director, share with us what you have that will enhance our mission. Everything goes to mission instead of everything going back to the treasurer and money. Those are the churches that thrive. The rich church is always talking about lives, whereas in the poor church, they're generally talking money. The rich church will always be lifting up with you how we affected a life, how we changed a life. They will have testimonies on a weekly basis. They'll have them on their websites and other places that people can readily see. Lives actually being changed. Poor churches tend to put how they're doing with their budget income on their websites and in their bulletins. They'll want to talk about whether they're balancing the budget or not. And that's what they celebrate the most. In the rich church, they're always talking discipleship. In the poor church, they talk appeasement. The rich church is saying, what do we need to do to make a disciple? What do we need to do to make a disciple? That's what we're here for. What do we need to do? And in the poor church is, what do we need to do to make sure we don't tick off Uncle John? How can we just appease this person? How can we just make things calm? Those churches fail. People don't want to give just to make Uncle John happy. They want to give to make disciples for Jesus. And then, lastly, and it's almost ironic how often you hear the name of Jesus in those churches that we call the rich churches. I mean, as Jesus calls us, Jesus is the one we're trying to follow. Jesus would have us do. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. In the poor church, they substitute church. Why we need to do this for the church. Why the church needs this. Why we've got to keep the church neat. We've got to do such and such for the church, for the church. It is for the church that we control, not for Jesus who controls us. That is the biggest motivator here. People want to give their money around the mission of Jesus, not around the mission of church. In the rich church, you will notice that they know how to manage debt principle. In the poor church, you'll notice they know how to manage debt payments. Now, I've been at this work a long time, and I've seen good churches and bad churches and successful churches and failed churches and everything in between. I have noticed that it's really very, very hard to kill a church. And there's only one thing I know of that all by itself can kill it. You know, I've worked with some really bad pastors. They were really bad. Gosh almighty, when I'd go worship there on Sunday, oh man, they could put you out in like 30 seconds. I mean, it was terrible. You were reaching for your cell phone so fast just to try to stay awake, give you some kind of something stimulating, because this person was just awful. Just awful. Generally, they're the same kind of person that, you know, like to sleep late until 10 o'clock, and then they'd take a mid-morning break at 10:30, get themselves together again in time to go to lunch. I mean, they just piddled away their day. They just couldn't do their work. They were just awful pastors. They just were. But I've noticed that churches have a way of sort of moving that person down the road. Another pastor would come in and the ship would get righted and it'd be okay. I've also worked with some really awful laity. Mean, vicious, spiteful, backstabbing, ugly to the core, just bad people. Thankfully, I was a pastor long enough, I got a chance to bury several of them. And you know, once you did, church seemed to come together again. Got its legs underneath it and went on and was able to do its work. But I've also worked with wonderful pastors who had great laity all around them. And I've watched that church have to close because of one really bad decision made on one really bad night in regards to debt that they couldn't fix. Debt is the only thing I know of that has the sole and singular power to kill a church, regardless of how good it is otherwise. The rich church knows how to manage that debt, and the poor church doesn't. And I say that to you so that you will be as careful as possible if you're going to mess around with debt in your ministry. The rich church, I've noticed, never goes into debt without seeing exactly where the end is when they're going to get out of it. But the poor church will go into debt if they can just see getting through that year. The rich church will only borrow money for a short term. But the rich church, they'll borrow money for as long a term as they can possibly get. The rich church never borrows money without having a safety net. The poor church has no net. And by that, I mean this. The rich church is aware that stuff happens. Stuff happens. They may have gone into debt in what was a great and fruitful time, but in a year, 2, 3, 5, some really bad things can occur. Viruses can hit. Churches have to close. People fly planes into a building. Recessions come on. I mean, all of those things have happened in the last 20 years right here in America. And all of them seriously affected the church's ability to receive income. Churches that had their debt under control during all of those occurrences came out fine, but churches that were saddled with way too much suffered mightily, and some even closed. The rich church will always have a net. It will say, I'm borrowing this money on as short a term as possible, that if need be, and under emergency circumstances, I can go to the bank and say, Mr. Banker, I know we had a 20 or 10-year note. I need to stretch this to 20 years. Mr. Banker, I know that we were paying you this much in interest and principal, but for this next year after what's happened, I need to only have to pay you interest. And every banker I know will work with those churches to make those adjustments. But if you started into debt in the first place with as long a term as you can get, and you started out just paying interest, when the bad stuff happened, you had nowhere to go. and you were stuck. And you were stuck. In the rich church, whenever they vote on going into debt, they make sure everybody present and voting has the understanding that we will pay this off. If not one new person enters into this church, we will pay this off. In the poor church, they seem to have this attitude, if we'll just get this started, there'll be so many other people coming in that they can finish it off. And in the rich church, they will never borrow more than 2 times whatever they raised in a capital campaign. So before you go into debt, you always want to have some type of a campaign prior to that. It's far better for people to give you money than loan you money. So you ask them to give you money to start with. Whatever that amount was that you were able to raise in that campaign, 2 times that much is how much you could borrow. So if you raised $1 million, you can borrow 2. But in the poor church, they just have a build it and they'll come mentality. It doesn't matter what it costs as long as we can just see making the first payments, because they're going to come and get us through this. So if it's 3 million or 4 million, we can stretch it out. Let me show you in this next slide exactly what that means. Let's say you've got a rich church and you have a poor church. They're doing a ministry kind of campaign, not a debt campaign. So let's say they're building a children's wing of some sort. Both of these churches have budgets of $500,000. And both of them are able to do campaigns and raise $1 million. So at this point, they're very similar churches. Doing well, both of them need a children's wing, both of them have $500,000 budgets, both of them raise $1 million. They're doing just fine collectively. One's the East Side Church, one's the West Side Church. But the architect who's designing both wings comes to them and says, well, the cost is going up, and it's not going to be just $2 million to build this wing, it's now going to be $3 million. So what do you want to do? The rich church, they say, we're not borrowing more than 2 times what we raised. So 2 times $1 million is $2 million. So if it costs 3, Mr. Architect, we got to trim $1 million. Our budget is our budget. So you trim the aesthetics, or you trim the square feet, or you let us know how you're getting $1 million out of it. But that's what we have to do. Over in the poor church, their discussion was, where is your faith? Why, we just raised $1 million. 3 million is just 1 million more than we had anticipated. And we just finished raising that. Well, we can do anything we want. And besides, just think about how many more new people are going to be coming in and will be here. And they'll all be helping pay for this. So we're going to go ahead and do it all, and we're going to borrow $3 million. Everybody walks out of both meetings and they're happy. Well, 6 years later, and after they have had another capital campaign and raised another $1 million, you find the rich church owes a little over $500,000. But now the church I call the poor church, they owe $1.8 million. Neither one of them are able to do 3 capital campaigns in a row, so they say, we're going to have to go out and get a 10-year note. 10 years at prime rate for the rich church comes to about $66,000 a year. But 10 years for the poor church comes to $218,000 a year. If both of their budgets had gone up 5% per year, that means that in the rich church, they're going to be paying 10% of their budget for debt. But in the poor church, they're going to be paying 33% of their budget for debt. Now, here's what happens. In most good churches, you're going to spend about 55% of your budget for salaries and personnel cost. So in the rich church, if you did that, 55 onto 10 comes out to 65%. it leaves you still another 35% of your budget for all the other expenses you're going to have. Worship, insurance, landscaping, the music ministry, children's ministry, missions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your church denominational askings inside of that 35%. But the poor church spends 55% on staff, and now they find themselves at 88% used up, and they only have 12% left for everything else. 12%. If they pay their conference request, it leaves just about zero to pay the light bill, to do worship, or to do anything else. Your plan then is to spend 115, 120% of your budget. Well, you can't do that. Can't spend what you don't have, so now you got to cut. So how do you cut? What can you cut? You have your meeting. Cut two things. Well, we can cut out the conference asking. All right, that's 10%. But that's not enough. Well, let's cut back on staff. Cut out the youth director. Cut out the children's director. Cut out somebody doing something that's ministering to our people. And then what do you begin to notice? Well, you cut your youth director, and the folks who had youth decided they'd go over to the West Side Church, the rich church, because they were able to keep their youth director. And now you have one less donor. And you start ceasing to do that which people come to your church to have done. And so people start to exit one church. And now that church has less and less a foundation to give. Where the one thing you'd like to cut that nobody likes is this 33% of debt, but you can't cut it. It is what it is. You cannot mess with that. And as your church spirals down to eventually having to close because of one bad decision on one night regarding debt. Now, I don't want you to hear me and think, well, Cliff is Dave Ramsey. He doesn't want us to have debt. No, debt can be a good ministry tool. It can be effective and it can be helpful. But debt can kill you. And that's what I'm trying to get you to hear. To me, debt is like a chainsaw. I own a chainsaw. A chainsaw can be a very effective tool if you have a tree that goes down in your yard or big wind causes a problem. You can take that chainsaw and do quick work with it, and it's a great thing. But when you're using that chainsaw, you'd better be well aware that if I don't use it right, this chainsaw could kill me. So you use it properly. That's what debt is. Used right, it can move your ministry forward. But used wrong, it can become the bullet that takes the life of your church. So enter into debt with your eyes wide open and be extremely wise. Now, moving forward, the other key strategies of how to be a rich church versus a poor church. In the rich church, those of us at Horizons have noticed that stewardship is just sort of life with them. It is just a part of their core value. It is who they are. And in the poor church, it's just forbidden. You just don't talk about it. You don't mention it. You don't write about it. It is just not a part of our Christian experience. In the rich church, it's very frequent in worship. Very frequent. But in the poor church, it's once a year. Now, right now, we're in that season. It's October. I heard a pastor the other day said, well, it's the fall when we do stewardship. Really? Really? You only do stewardship. You only pay attention to what God has given you Jesus' wallet for 3 weeks a year, 1 month a year, 1 Sunday a year? Really? That's what you said. And that gets communicated. The culture is out there and people hear it. Oh, that's right. This is that time. We'll just grin and bear it. Or maybe we just won't tune in next week because that's what it's going to be about. He's going to be talking about our sin. How much we love money. I don't want to hear it. I'm turning it off. I won't have to do it for long. Preacher won't ever talk about it again come November. When that is there, you get the sense the spiritual leader of our congregation doesn't really care about this, therefore I don't have to either. And that's what happens in the poor church. But in the rich church, it's almost every Sunday. There's some testimony, witness of what stewardship is all about. Their offering is a high moment. Now, I grant you, right now, it is hard to make the offering a high moment. It really is. When we're basically, having a time of offering where there's a special music or whatever, but it's really not a time for anybody to be contemplating the giving and what they're going to do, because we've already talked to them about how to give with their credit card or online and in various ways. But once we're back in session, that time of pause does not need to be time out in church. It needs to become a high moment of testimony and witness to how we're changing lives as we are asking people to support it. In the rich church, pastors will model stewardship. They will model it and they'll reference it. They will tell in writing and in person what they are giving. Every Christian in your church doesn't need to do this, but every pastor does. It's a part of the job. It's a part of the job. If you're going to be asking others and you're going to be leading this congregation, and if you believe in stewardship, you must witness to it. It's just like any other key core part of ministry. You don't ask your people to pray for a certain period of time without committing to be in prayer yourself. Specifically, how you're going to be in prayer. You don't say to them, it's very important that we go on this mission to Latin America. You go yourself because you are the leader. And when we are asking them to be generous, we must witness to generosity in ways they understand. And not just by saying, I intend to give, I intend to be generous, I will tithe. People don't know what tithe means. But what I'm talking about is you pay me $50,000 a year. And at a minimum, I'm returning to this church $5,000 of that. And I hope to do better in our building fund or mission outreach or other things, but at least I wanted you to understand that is my minimal commitment back to you. We have to model what we're talking about. And we have to preach it. Not just that one Sunday a year, but throughout the year. The best time for a stewardship sermon is the first part of January when people are looking at reordering their lives. Not in the middle of October. And then worship in the rich church is always alive, and it's vibrant, and it's relevant, and it's meaningful, and it shows off who we are, our love for Christ, and how we're doing that mission. Far too often you get the experience in the poor church that worship is just checking the box. Oops, it's 11 o'clock. I have to do worship. Thank God it's 12. I get to quit. When that is the experience, people lose that sense of wanting to give to you because they believe that you're not using what it is they're giving already.
Okay. We are back live and we're open for discussion. Who wants to start? Can you hear me? Okay. Go ahead, Kenny. You're muted.
There we go.
There you go.
So I really appreciate what he said about if we're asking people to be generous, that we need to be generous ourselves. People respond when they know that the pastor has some skin in the game. So from time to time, certainly not all the time, but from time to time, when you're asking for special giving, you have to let people know that I'm gonna contribute to this. The people that count your offering know how much the pastor is putting in the plate every month. And if you're asking for people to exhibit high commitment to the finances of the church, then you have to exhibit a high commitment to the finances of the church.
Yes. Good point. Thank you. Others?
Hey, Maggie. So I don't want to talk too much, but I will just say that I think that all of the foundational points that Cliff is talking about are effective. I find his preaching and his style pretty abrasive, and so I have to kind of get the meat of it without the his personality, you know. So if I can get to that, then I feel like those core values are very, very good. And he, I mean, his expertise seems to come through in his writing. So that's great. I think that would be my only just comment about Cliff in general and his presentation.
Okay, thank you. And just to kind of go back, he made basically 2 points in this second presentation. And the first one was it's mission first. Keep that in focus, and that's the thing that you need to be continually lifting up before your congregation or group or whatever, you know, leadership group you're working with. Mission first, which we heard in the first session. And then secondly, debt, you need to be, you know, very clear about what you're doing and the long-term effect of debt, and to not go into it, you know, blindly. And those are good words, because we've all seen churches where debt was necessary and helpful, and also congregations where debt was deadly. So, and those were points that he made there. So, other comments?
I thought the conversation about the debt was very interesting to me.
Sorry, say that again, Ronnie. It was a little fuzzy.
I'm sorry. I thought the conversation about the debt was interesting to me, and trying to find the delicate balance, as opposed to how do you stay focused on the mission, and that's just been a place. You know, you don't want to, when you come to a church that's had a lot of debt, and then you finally get out of that debt. The saints figure like going in debt is going back to Egypt. So they're not trying to go back in any kind of way for no reason. And trying to find that delicate balance is some of the tension that I've encountered, just trying to find that delicate balance, because you can't always pay for everything up front. And even though you would like that, but when people have experienced some bad debt and trying to recover from that, it's very difficult trying to move forward, and trying to have those conversations about mission sometimes get thrown out the window. It's just that all they can see is the debt. And so, that part of the conversation I really, really appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I think Cliff would probably make the point, as would any leadership consultant, is that debt has to follow the vision. when you can communicate the vision and the reasoning for it, make the case for it, then the debt discussion becomes a lot more healthy. And I think that's kind of paraphrase a little bit of what he was saying there, which I think is true. I agree with that.
I think so much of what he was talking about was related to changing a culture in our churches too. And in my church, they did not have a culture of, any sermons on financial giving or on stewardship. So then going from that to a time period where we did talk about it, to then be able to transition into a period where it's just a natural part of our yearly worship. I think we probably have a lot of work to do in all of our churches in changing and shifting that culture to one that sees money and stewardship in a biblical way. But it's helpful to think about those things in those big transitions.
Good point, Dan. Thanks. Others?
I echo what Ronnie said. That debt part was that was supreme. That was the best part of all that. And I love the chainsaw analogy because I will use that with my nieces and nephews for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
I also appreciated the fact that he brought up the dynamic of having stewardship campaign, stewardship season, basically, versus stewardship being a part of our DNA. And it is something that we discuss on a regular basis. I always have these questions as to like, how did these type of campaigns get just input in our DNA to say, okay, instead of us saying, it is always our duty to be stewards of what God has given us, to it's saying, okay, like he said, 3 weeks in October, this is when it's time for us to be responsible for the church. And so I was in total agreement with him about saying, we need to kind of, although it may be painful for some of us, learn how to change that. Whereas if, it's like, okay, if you're taking a vitamin every day, it's part of your regimen, versus you don't take vitamins and now all of a sudden your mom's saying, come here, take this medicine. I don't like medicine. So I hate to use it that way, but when we can move our people to a culture, this is our reasonable service. It seems like it's easier.
Yeah. One of my mentors shared with me, taught me once many years ago that every sermon should have an application of stewardship involved in it. Stewardship of either money or time or prayer or energy or mission or attendance, all of it. And you don't have to, you really kind of have to work to include it without it becoming obvious. But I think that's one of the ways that the preacher can affect the environment or the culture of a congregation, is to be intentional about providing solid stewardship guidance in all areas, not just money. That makes sense?
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing, Mackie. Maybe we need to help people, our churches and each other, broaden the definition of stewardship, because I think most people immediately jump to money. And if you can help refocus that on a monthly basis, emphasis, or weekly, like you said, but this month we're going to focus on the stewardship of our mind and body, and next month it's going to be stewardship of the earth. I know that can get controversial too, but
you're right, Wayne, and the thing, and to be intentional about that and to be upfront about it. This is where I'm being led today, and this is why. Because everyone sitting in that congregation is a steward of either personal gifts, life, body, time, energy, but also a steward of the world. How do you love your neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's kind of a opening your mind to a broader concept. Other comments or questions? Well, okay. We're gonna take a few minutes now just for some closing information and comments. Then we're going to call on Wayne to end our session with a prayer. Let me give you some things, and I'm going to send you an email later today. It'll have all this laid out in it, but I'll go ahead and kind of warn you for it. In the email you're going to get here in a little while, there's going to be the email addresses for both Cliff and Brian. And both of them have said to make sure that their email addresses are shared with you. And if you have specific questions about anything that Cliff said or Brian said, you'd like to enter a conversation with them, the best way to contact them is through their email. So you'll get that. We are working on arranging Zoom calls for the 3 presentations that we were not able to have yesterday or today. So be watching for Zoom invitations for a 1-hour conversation with Ronald Theodore from Westpath, an invitation for a case study, a panel discussion that'll be 1 hour in length. And we have 3 panelists who will present comments on a case study that you'll get prior to that conversation for your reading. And then an invitation for a 3-hour Zoom call with Julie and John Brandenberger. Now, John and Julie own Community Bakery here in Little Rock, and you may have seen the article on them in the Arkansas United Methodist several months ago about how they take their faith and apply it in personal business and in personal life. And so I would refer you back to the ARUMC website to find that article and read it. They are very fascinating people and very faithful people, and you will enjoy their conversation. That'll be a Zoom call, so it'll be interactive. The other thing we want to say about that is that Julie is a certified public accountant, and she is a financial planner. She does this kind of on the side now. She used to do it full time, but it's kind of a side work with her. We have arranged for each of you, if you would like, to have 3 sessions with Julie, free of charge. The foundation will provide for it, and she will meet with you and your family and give you advice and guidance on establishing personal budgets and managing debt like that. She'll provide that as a professional planning enterprise. So the next thing is, if you have ideas or issues or questions about future gatherings and meetings for this group, I need for you to email those to me as they come up. So just something that was jogged in the discussion, jogged in your memory, or a topic that we didn't discuss that you'd like to hear it presented, just send that to me in an email, and that goes in our basket to look at in future takes. In the next 2 weeks, you are going to get a participation gift from the foundation. This is being presented in connection and cooperation partnership with the Lilly Foundation. And one of the things that they would like for us to do is to give you $125 for participating. So be watching in the next 2 weeks. It's a gift from the foundation, and you can, it's your money. You can do with it what you want. We will ask you to provide us with a tithe statement, 10%. I'm joking. That's not true. But that's a gift, and every session that we have, that will follow to appreciate your participation. And the last thing is mark down March 16 and 17, March 16 and 17 of 2021. That will be your next session, session 2 of cohort B. And you'll be getting information about that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So just watch for that, but I'll go ahead and give you the date. And that'll be included on the email that I send out here in a little while. So if anybody has any concluding remarks, we'll hear them. And when we're through with that, we'll turn to Wayne for a closing prayer. Yes, Dane.
Yeah, Mackie, can we go back to, I mean, Brian was really in a hurry at the end of the day, and we've got a couple of minutes here. Can we go back to what we were talking about at the end of the day? Because I still feel like we were talking about two different things.
Okay, go ahead.
A professional reimbursable account can be provided to many types of employees, superintendents, business leaders. I mean, they can have a reimbursable account provided by their company that is not part of their salary package. I mean, is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Well, that seemed to me what he was describing is happening at Central, that they're setting up reimbursable accounts for pastors that have nothing to do with their salary package. And my understanding is what we're doing on our salary form is a different thing than what he's describing. We're choosing to name part of our salary as professional expenses, and then we have to account for that for our own personal taxes. Those are just two different things that are happening, and we were talking about them both at the same time, and it was a very confusing conversation.
Well, anybody else want to jump in there? Because that's kind of what I got from it.
Yeah, and within what Dane's saying too, there's also, regarding that with the pastor, two ways of doing that too. One way is similar to what Brian said as a pastor, to where you are turning in receipts to the church and being reimbursed, which is the preferred way. There is a way where persons, though, have simply taken that almost as a draw from a church and then said, you know, they're keeping their receipts at the side. I was cautioned always against not doing it that way. But I know that there are those pastors in the past that chose to do it that way.
Yeah.
He did describe it as something separate from your salary and from the church, because it's in a separate section at the bottom of the compensation sheet.
Yeah. And that has tax purpose, tax reasons.
Right.
If it's done that way, you don't have to declare it as income. Is that correct?
Right. But my understanding is if I talk to my finance committee about that, they would just say, okay, we'll set that up as a separate line item, but we're going to take that out of your salary. I mean, the net difference is the same for us, is my point. It changes the tax implications a little bit, but whether we're getting that $3,000 as our salary and we're accounting for it, or whether we're getting it separately and we're accounting for it, it seemed like we were.
That's right. Well, you don't want to double dip, as some pastors have done. That's been part of the problem too. And I'll drag Bo Baker into this conversation, but I can remember years ago and hearing about wrestlings out even in the Congress and when things were going to change and not, and X, Y, and Z, and charitable giving to a church. And one of the issues was pastors who were double dipping. Just like how he went through the thing about the housing. Sadly, there have been preachers who have lived among us who have tried to do all the above, who tried to not claim the allowance which was given to them, pressure the finance person and not put it on their, in essence, on their check as a breakout, then wanted to claim the interest and all the actual expenses on a home. You can't do that. You can't not have the allowance shown on as being paid to you and then want to claim all those expenses personally on your income taxes. And sadly, preachers have done just that.
Well, you can do it. You can also get caught.
Yeah. Yeah.
You said Bo Baker. Did you mean Bo Frazier?
Bo Frazier.
My mistake. Yeah, I word.
Yes.
Same guy. I'll just throw. Yes. But a great guy.
Colin.
Well, and that's who I work with, and that's just, again, that's kind of my confusion from yesterday. My confusion centered around, in working with Bo, Gene and I just give him our bottom line, and he tells us, he says, okay, this is, again, because a lot of times you're dealing with that person who's a volunteer versus the person that's a CPA. Heather asked, who is Bo Frazier? He's a member at Trinity in Little Rock, but he does a lot of, as his gift to to pastors, he does a lot of our taxes and stuff. So he's who I use, who we use in our family, and I know a lot of pastors use him. But what I was getting back to what I was saying though, with working with Bo, it's like, okay, you're going to set $3,000 aside, or you're going to pull $3,000 out of your your salary out of your compensation package for account reimbursable. And then he's going to figure all of that out. He's going to look at what, what I'm putting into pension on my own, things like that. And then he's going to send to our church financial people. He's going to say, okay, this is how much you need to withhold, which is another factor. Are they withholding, or are you paying it quarterly? Because some churches vary in that regard. So it's all confusing, and it's it's always been done this way, or it's just, yeah. So I'm glad Dane brought it back up today.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the difference too is that if you're paying in, or if it's coming from your salary, pastors are gonna feel a lot more attached to that money, and like it's their money, and everything they purchase with that is their money. Whereas if you're getting tax breaks on it and it's not considered part of your compensation, that's the church's money, and what is purchased with that are the churches. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice when we aren't telling our congregations that this should be a separate item from our compensation package, because then we're taking the tax break on it and have ownership of it because it's part of our salary. So what really, I think we need to standardize and say, churches, create a separate item from your compensation package. Otherwise, we're going to be doing this all day long. This is what it seems like.
Well, interestingly enough, you just received an email from Brian Swain with his presentation. I don't know if you saw it pop up on your screen. It did on mine. This might be something that you would want to continue to visit with Brian about, or have someone in your congregation contact Brian and say, this is the person that, been recommended to us to give guidance, and help clarify that so that you feel more comfortable about it and the church feels comfortable and is doing the right thing. And Brian is somebody that would be highly recommended for any conversation like that. If you are to go to Bo and say, Bo, would you visit with my congregation and explain this, and then everybody's on the same page.
Well, and I would say after our conversation yesterday, I called Brian and talked to him for probably 20 minutes because I was so confused about all the stuff yesterday. And I'm always so panicked that I'm doing it wrong, and that's going to come back to haunt me or one of my churches, the churches I serve. And so, and I told him in Mountain Home, the financial secretary there would always write a check to me and the senior pastor at the end of the year for what we didn't turn in receipts for out of our AR account. And I told her, like, that's not what you're supposed to do. If we don't use it, we lose it. And she said, well, this is the way I've always done it, so here's your check. And she would never not do it. And then I get to Clarksville and they have an AR policy, and it clearly says in the bottom, whatever's purchased and receipted in this line item of this compensation sheet is the property of the pastor. And I, again, told my financial committee here, that's not right. And they have no qualms about changing it. So it's still like that. But I told the finance chair last night after our conversation, I said, I think I'm going to add a caveat to that policy that says it can be gifted to the pastor, or it can be not at all gifted to the pastor, or there can be a negotiation of price so that the pastor can take the property with him or her.
Yeah. But I think the issue is that most churches don't see that as a separate thing, and most of the pastors have never been taught that that's a separate thing. And the amount that we designate is just considered part of our salary package. I mean, when I was told what the salary was when I went to the church, it was this salary, and then I designated part of it for how much, kind of like what Dane was saying. And I think the thing is that needs to be separate. If it's going to be separate, it needs to be separate. It doesn't need to be part of the salary package, because I think that's where the confusion is. If it's going to be the church's, then it needs to be designated as, this is the church's money that we're doing that expenses, and then we have our salary package, which should be separate. Or we need to keep doing it the way we're doing it, because it's two different things. That's where I think the issue is. Go ahead, Justin.
Sure, I was just going to agree. if you use the model that you're describing, and I hate to make generalities, but I think that's a very common model, that it's within your charge conference and you're appointed to a church, and then the breakout, if you will, is up to the pastor, how much you're going to put into your PIP or not, how much you're going to put into X, Y, or Z. You know, if you happen to be in a church where you're getting an allowance rather than living in a parsonage with rental value, that you and your family are going to make decisions about that. And so the pastoral account reimbursable section of that form, back to this part about assets and computers, when that is a part of your salary that you've made a purchase, that asset is yours and comes, and you're not negotiating the purchase of said asset, you know. Largely, I believe, and I'm not trying to be presumptuous, a lot of what Brian was saying was with a larger church with a larger staff, which includes a lot of people that are not appointed in the way that the clergy member is. And so they're providing that to a number of their staff, youth staff, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to imagine, without ever having looked at Clifton's personal breakout, but I'm going to imagine that maybe some of the pastors, perhaps him or others, even when they were at Central, still filled out the same forms we all do, may have made choices about their reimbursable expenses, so forth. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that being the model. I don't believe Brian was suggesting otherwise either. I'm going to imagine the standard for most pastors is to do their breakout for their charge conference and to work through their receipts with their local church. You know,
I do think there is the argument from the conference and district side is that if we're all doing it in a uniform way, that it's one number, a salary compensation, and you divide it up how you choose, then we're comparing appointments, apples to apples, oranges to oranges.
That's correct.
If every church is doing it different, if you get a bottom line salary and you get an AR and you get then we end up not having a clear picture of what the total packages are. And I agree. I think Central is.
I bet Mackie could speak to that. I wouldn't have a clue, but that sounds believable to me, Dane.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that superintendents would always get because when a superintendent would talk to you about an appointment, they'd give you a bottom line figure, and we would use the phrase, now, however you want to divide that out, that's between you and the church, and just show it on the sheet. One of the things that would be frustrating to superintendents is when they'd have that discussion, the pastor would come back and say, well, I'm giving $2,500 additional as a gift to my pension fund. Where does that go?
Right.
Well, what do you mean? You know, because that's not figured in the overall, you know, stuff like that. Well, I'm giving a car. Nobody says anything about that. Well, no, wait, what do you mean? So it is, Dane, the effort to get comparisons of apples to apples so that when you're talking about changing pastors, you can give correct information.
Yep. And
churches are not really good at that.
Mackie, can you speak to the discipline? And my memory is somewhere I was servicing a church in a circuit somewhere, as I recall, and charge conference happened and they set their breakout and so forth and so on. And as I remember, one of the issues that arose in a church once upon a time was that a pastor did not use all of what there was in that reimbursable, and in essence wanted to, quote, put that back into salary, you know, in essence wanted to redo it. Now, am I wrong? Does a church not have to call a charge conference in order to do that? A pastor and a treasurer can't just say, oh, well, you didn't use this $2,000, so here's $1,000 back. Am I wrong about that, Mackie?
Well, I had a discipline once, and I did read it one time. But in serious response to your question, if the bottom line figure of a pastoral support changes to any degree, it is required to be changed in a charge conference setting. Now, if the bottom line figure, let's say it's $50,000, and if $2,500 of that is for reimbursables, and you only take $2,000 of it, the other $500 goes back to the pastor, which you then have to declare as income, or you give it up. That doesn't change that bottom line figure.
Okay.
So that's the only, and depending on who the superintendent is and the circumstances of it, the superintendent can say, you don't need to call the meeting to do that. You know, okay. It's all kind. But say in the middle of the year, charge conference, so the church says, well, we want to cut the salary of the pastor by, 10%, that requires a charge conference because it's compensation change or increase at 10%. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think that's right.
I'm looking at some of the chatter, and sounds like somebody's asked who is Bo Frazier, or somebody mentioned Todd Burris. It sounds like, Mackie, you may have some suggestions already for our next session on some kind of a session.
Yeah. And I don't know what the conference is doing now or what it's done in the last year or two. So, being in the retired relationship, I don't have contact about that. But that may be one of the things that we want to tack on in the next session, is to have somebody come and deal specifically with that question, and even bring a form and talk about its relevance and what goes where. And of course, the thing about it is you're going to be the only people in the annual conference that are doing it right, know anything about it, because nobody else is on the call. But at least you guys will be right.
Well, the insurance, not to muddy the waters more too, but if we were to do that, to talk about the form and as clergy, how we organize things financially, and as a pastor, insurance might be one of those things for people to have a little understanding about with this too. For years, a long time ago in the dark ages, we had it conference insurance. We don't anymore. And so now it's up to individuals and families to figure that out. But how that's accounted for also is a part of this. I bet Todd would be willing to. I bet Wayne could twist his arm, get him on here with us.
I bet we can.
I bet we can do that. Okay, anything else for the good of the cause?
Yes, one more thing. We need to train people in our churches too, not just pastors, because when I first started, nobody knew how to fill out that stupid form at my first appointment. Even the senior pastor said, well, you'll figure it out. Great, that's a lot of help. So yes, pastors, we need to get it, but also those people in the churches that give you the forms and want it turned in before charge conference.
Good. That's a good point, Claire. And let me just kind of tell you a little bit about where I think this is going to go. Session 1 and 2, the title of this program is Financial Literacy for Clergy and Congregation. Session 1 and 2 focuses primarily on the pastor. And but when we move to session 3 and 4, probably financial groups, your finance committee, your planning group, they're going to be involved in some of the conversations. And we anticipate it kind of expanding those conversations to the people in your congregation that affect those kinds of changes. So this is probably one of the things that we're going to want to do, is talk with y'all about it, but then at some point bring in the person that's responsible for filling out those forms and say, this is the way you need to do it. So that's a good idea, and that's kind of where we're headed. Heath?
Maybe
Heath.
Well, and probably someone like Dan could speak to this, as he was just ordained this past annual conference. But do we have is there any boot camp or any, I know at one time we talked about a clergy boot camp that when you come out of seminary, whether it be at the first, that transition workshop or whatever, there is that time that is spent on compensation sheet, account reimbursable plans, insurance. These are the conversations to help all clergy, not, we can't just say young clergy, because we know we have people who are career changing, and they go into ministry 40s, 50s, 60s, and they've never filled out this compensation sheet. So is any of that happening?
Well, let me respond to that. Then when we go to D, he had a question. We've had conversations with the Board of Ordained Ministry to include this type of education in the RIM process. And we didn't get anywhere with that. So we kind of went out on our own like this. But this kind of conversation, or part of it, this kind of training, would be natural in a RIM process. So, okay, D.
Sorry, I was trying to use the space bar and it wouldn't work to unmute me. So I put it in the chat, but my suggestion would be like some of those little those specific things that we're talking about, like especially for treasurers and for finance chairs, like for the compensation sheet. It would be great to have those filmed and maybe work with the Center for Communication to post those on the YouTube page or on the course material or the course curriculum, so that we could share that with the with some of our folks at some finance meetings or administrative council meetings, or just with our folks, so that we're all on the same page and we kind of have the authority of the conference with us, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. And Amy Ezell is on the call right now, so she's hearing that. So that would be something that she could pick up, and maybe we could help with that through the foundation.
She put yes, so I'm assuming that she's on board for that. Yeah. I'm just, not that I'm going to hold that to her, but.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks, Dee. Anything else?
This was really great. I'm so appreciative.
Good.
Can you give us any insight on the Razorbacks report moving forward, or the election, either one?
It will all come out in the wash. And for financial matters, buy low and sell high. We're going to ask Wayne to have a closing prayer, and then we'll be finished. And you know how to get a hold of us at any time. And so feel free to text or call or email. Wayne.
Yeah, this has been great conversation and some things for us to certainly think about. And I would just echo again what Mackie said. I had already planned on saying, if you all, some of you are very much out there by yourselves. And if you need somebody just to call and bounce a crazy idea off, or just need some support, we may not have the answer, but we certainly have good listening ears. We invite you to do that. I also remind us that, we don't have to do this alone. This whole topic, scholars differ and argue, but there's a lot of times Jesus talks about this whole topic of money. And sometimes he's using money to demonstrate another point, but this is certainly not a secret for him. And then our very own founder, Mr. Wesley, has a lot of sermons, a lot of quotes. So, turn to some of those things so you don't feel like you got to do that alone. But thank you again for your time. And after my prayer, I wish you the very best for the rest of the afternoon and in your ministry. So let us pray. Holy God, you have once again blessed us by being together, even though it is in maybe a different way than what we have been used to. It is a way, oh God, that brings us so that we do not have to feel alone. Remind us, oh God, of all the blessings in life, including those financial blessings. But remind us that we are also to help others remember those blessings and how they are to be the good stewards of not just money, but themselves and the world around them and their neighbor. So go with us and carry us forward in the days and the tasks that lie before us, knowing that you in your loving arms continue to surround us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good rest of the day.